The Edmonton Oilers have the best points percentage in the entire NHL since November 23rd. Sitting here in early January, there's only one simple question. Who should the Oilers be worried about in the Western Conference?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on today's show, we're going to hit quite a few beats around the Western Conference and compartmentalize the different tiers of teams within the West in relation to where the Oilers are at. Because a lot of how this season has unfolded, the Oilers have been working their way gradually up the standings ladder, and they're playing 750 points percentage hockey since November 23rd. They've been the best team in the league for, I would say, almost 6 weeks at this point. And I do think this is probably a high watermark as far as regular season consistency. I expect that number to slowly start to trickle back down just because that's too high. You know, if you were to think about the final 42 games of the regular season and you were to play 750 points percentage. So let's do basic math. You have 42 games, you have 84 potential standings points. 75% of 84 is a big number that I'm going to do on my calculator right now because I don't want to misrepresent what I'm talking about. That would be 63 of 84 potential points. And the Oilers right now have 53. So if they were to finish the second half of the season with 63 points in their final 42 games, that would put them at 116, which is not going to happen. 116 points would be President's Trophy good. And look, I'm not saying the Oilers couldn't go on a crazy heater and maybe pass Winnipeg and finish with the 1 seed in the entire Western Conference, but that's not realistic to expect. I think you're more likely to see that number trickle back down closer to maybe 650 as opposed to 750, which would be more than adequate to get the Oilers into the playoffs. So there's a lot of ground to cover on this show, and I wanted to start today's episode with the teams that I think are good enough to win the Stanley Cup, but I have serious questions about. I have 2 teams in this category. Number 1, I have the Winnipeg Jets. The Jets sit at 28-12-2. They score 3.62 goals per game. They concede 2.52 goals against per game. They're getting Vezina caliber goaltending from Connor Hellebuck again. They have the best power play in the entire NHL. They convert 32% of their power plays, so pretty much 1 in 3. Their penalty kill is only 19th at 78.1. Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele are both over points per game paces. Mark Scheifele's top 5 in the entire NHL in goals. Josh Morrissey has 38 points in 42 games while also being an elite defensive defenseman. They have quality depth like Cole Perfetti, Nino Niederreiter, Vlad Namestnikov, Alex Iafallo, and Gabe Vilardi, who leads the team in power play goals with 10. My only reservation and my sole reservation with the Winnipeg Jets is their best player is their goalie. And speaking as someone who's spent a lot of their life watching the New York Rangers with the best player on their team being their goalie, it is really hard for a goalie to will a team through 4 playoff series. And if you'll recall, the Jets have only gone past the second round 1 time since their return to Winnipeg. They are a team that has consistently run into teams with better star power, more high-end players, and that's really been their undoing. It's not that the Jets are a bad team, anything but. They are supremely talented. They have nice depth. They have one truly elite player in Connor Hellebuck. I think Kyle Connor is a top 50 player in the NHL. I think Josh Morrissey is a top 10 defenseman in the NHL, and they have a lot of top 100, top 150 players throughout their lineup. I think my biggest reservation for Winnipeg is what do they do in the postseason when it becomes harder to score? What do they do in the postseason when they are playing a team who has a bona fide top 5, top 10 player in the world? You saw what happened last year. I was very excited for that first round playoff series against Colorado, who we're going to talk about in the end of the second segment is where I have Colorado, but where they played Colorado. And I went into that series expecting 6 or 7 games of a lot of offense, and the Jets couldn't play any defense whatsoever, and that was their undoing. And the Jets' calling card is their defense. The Jets are the inversion of the Oilers, where they expect to play lockdown defense with the best goalie in the world in net, and then they only need to score 3 goals. And most nights in the regular season, if you have good defensive structure, you have good individual players, that's enough. Now, the Jets are going to run into teams who have better players. There are very few teams in the NHL who can't run into that issue of push coming to shove, where it's best on best and you need your best players to outplay the other teams. The Oilers have that trump card. I would say the Avalanche have that trump card. I think the Florida Panthers have that trump card. And that's really it. Maybe if you want to put Vegas in there with Mark Stone and Jack Eichel, I can hear that argument, even though I don't think those two are on the same tier as McKinnon, Rantanen, or Draisaitl, McDavid, or Tkachuk, Barkov. But they're at least worthy of mentioning, and we'll talk about Vegas in the final segment of today's show. And then the other team I have in this tier, I have the Minnesota Wild. And the Wild, very much like the Jets, have a tortured playoff history. They have consistently made the postseason over the last 10 to 15 years, but they've always run into just better teams, whether it's Vegas, whether it's Colorado, whether it's Edmonton. They have always run into a team that just happens to be better than them. And this iteration of the Wild, the 24-25, they are riding a Hart Trophy caliber season. Now, I don't know if Kirill Kaprizov is going to win the Hart Trophy. It would be a really cool story if he did. He's a tremendous player, one of the most dynamic skaters that I've ever seen at the NHL level. And he's in that McDavid, Barzal, Jack Hughes level of skater where he's a one-man offense. He can skate the puck into the zone with speed. He can wait for guys to catch up. He can skate the perimeter of the offensive zone on the power play and operate as functionally a mobile distributor where he doesn't need to score. He can set the other guys up. And one of the real differences for the Wild this year, as opposed to in years past, is their secondary guys aren't depth pieces. It's guys like Marco Rossi. It is guys like Matt Boldy. It is young pieces who have really put their games together and are really putting nice seasons together. And that matters a lot to me when I'm trying to piece it all together. And you have middling special teams. They're 21st in power play at 19%, so about 1 in 5. And then on the penalty kill, they're 29th. That's a major point of concern for the Wild, that their special teams are so mediocre. Brock Faber playing a minute more than he did last season, and I've been very impressed with Faber's game. I think he's very mobile. I think he's got the prototypical 21st. I shouldn't even say 21st century. I should say 2020s build of what you want from your best defenseman. He's very mobile. He's very good on the puck. He's very intelligent as far as his positioning and distribution. And I think the Wild, very much like the Jets, the one thing I will say about the Wild is Kaprizov's better than any individual player on the Jets. I think Kaprizov is firmly a top 10 player in the league, and I think you can make an argument. It's either him or Kucherov for the best winger in the entire NHL. You could probably put Mikko Rantanen in there as well. But having one of those guys does matter when it comes to a playoff series. We're going to take our first break of today's show. We're going to come back. We're going to tackle some more of the teams that the Oilers may run into come playoff time that are going to be in contention for good playoff seeding and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we have your team covered every day. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, or comedy. One of my favorite memories last year was going to Gov Ball Sunday, seeing Chapel Roan, seeing SZA, seeing Renee Rapp. The energy at a festival like that where you're outside for 9 straight hours, it's just the absolute best. I miss summer so much. It's so cold. And now our friends over at Gametime have made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. recently my friends and I were debating what I wanted to do for my birthday next month, and we've settled on going to Devils Golden Knights. And with Game Time picks, we found amazing deals and could even see the views from our seats before buying. The super deal was particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of Edmonton's showdown in Pittsburgh against the Penguins. We'll have a game episode up as soon as the game ends. Very grateful the Oilers are in the Eastern time zone and respecting my bedtime. It was so nice to be done with last night's episode at about 11:15, 11:30, as opposed to sometimes where I'm not sitting down to start recording until almost 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So very grateful the Oilers are in the Eastern time zone. And then getting back to today's episode, one last team I have in the Stanley Cup contender, but with some reservations category, is the Dallas Stars. I, for one, have been a staunch advocate, one of the biggest proponents of this Dallas Stars team over the last handful of seasons. When you go through their roster player by player, especially last year, the Stars ended up finishing, I think it was second in the President's Trophy chase. They made the big trade for Tanev. They were able to call up Logan Stankoven after the deadline and use him as forward reinforcements. Even if Joe Pavelski declined a bit last year, he's still in the mix. And the Stars are not playing as well this year as they did last year. They're definitely a playoff team, and I believe in their depth. That's really the biggest thing for me. When you talk about Jason Robertson and Rope Hintz and Wyatt Johnston, those are three of the best young players in the entire NHL all on one team. And then you have Logan Stankoven, you have the Bork brother you have Miro Heiskanen, you have Thomas Harley, you have Esa Lindell, you have Matt Duchene, you have Jamie Benn. Tyler Seguin will probably return to this lineup for the playoffs from injury at some point down the road. There is more than enough talent here to get it done. And we know the Stars will be active on the trade market. They've consistently, around the deadline, made moves to bolster their group. I think my real reservations about this group stem from their special teams and then from their overall. I love their high-end players. Let me preface what I'm about to say with that. I love Rope Hintz. He's one of my favorite players in the entire NHL. He's extremely underrated. Jason Robertson has been a pet project of mine for the last 3 seasons. I think he's a remarkable player. I think Miro Heiskanen is a victim of playing in an era with great defensemen, because in another era, he probably has at least one Norris Trophy by now. I think Jake Ottinger has top 10 goalie in the NHL capability when he's locked in. That playoff series he put together against the Calgary Flames 3 years ago is one of the best goalie performances I have ever seen in a losing effort. But all of that said, when the Stars get into these playoff series against teams like Colorado, like Edmonton, like Vegas, and look, I know they beat Vegas last year in the first round. That was a coin flip series that went 7 games where pretty much every single game was a 1-goal game. All of that to say, the Stars' high-end talent is not as good as the teams they're going to run up against in a second, a third, or in a cup final. That's really the difference for them. It's very similar to what I said in regards to Winnipeg and in regards to Minnesota. I love their players. Of all the teams in the NHL, I think the Stars have my favorite composition. I think they have drafted extremely well. I love the players they have focused on and trying to fine-tune their roster. Pieces like Mason Marchment, who have done a remarkable job of fitting in and being contributors, even though they don't play big roles. But I think the Stars are limited by the fact that they don't really have a game-breaking talent. That's the one difference I will say, is that the Wild in Kaprizov is a game-breaking talent. That is the type of player who will bend a playoff series to their will. And the last thought I have for you on the Stars, they're getting a little older. They're getting a little more expensive. Those factors do matter when we're talking about the long term. I think the Stars are more than capable of going on a deep playoff run, but having the 27th ranked power play, that's a cause for concern. Their penalty kill is the second best in the NHL right now. But again, I do have some concerns there. The next tier of teams I have is you will make the playoffs. And that's really all I have to say about you. The LA Kings, they're 23-10-5, 3.1 goals per game, 2.5 goals against. They have the 21st ranked starting goalie and goal saved above expected, 6.53. Their team save percentage is 900. The league average this year is 894. They have a singular point per game player in Anze Kopitar. Adrian Kempe is 1 point off of that pace. Their third leading scorer, Alex Laferriere, 26 points in 38 games. He's 23 years old. He's having a nice breakout season. They're 28th in power play. They are 8th in penalty kill, very much like some of the other teams we've discussed. Where is the Kings' high-end talent? And look, I love Anze Kopitar. He's put together one of the great careers of his era. You know, Anze Kopitar is an era-defining player. You will talk about when you are looking back on the 2010s in the 2030s, 2040s, and you're talking about the players you grew up with, the players who put together great careers that the young guys don't understand, you know, but you don't understand how good Anze Kopitar was, but Kopitar is not a game-breaking dynamic player. We'll see if Drew Doughty comes back. He got hurt in the preseason, broke his ankle, if I remember correctly, and that raises some concerns as far as their defense and the high-end ability there. They're getting functional NHL goaltending. They have nice pieces, but I don't think the Kings are capable of scoring enough, even if they do play elite defense, to be a serious contender. I think the Kings would desperately like to avoid playing the Oilers in the first round again, because I just don't think the Oilers present a favorable matchup for them. And then real quick, we got to get two more teams in this segment, because the final segment is entirely dedicated to talking about the Vegas Golden Knights. But the last two teams I have are, I would be scared of you, but... And in this category, I have the Avalanche and I have the Canucks. Both of these teams have incredibly gifted players. You know, McKinnon, Rantanen, Makar is probably the best 1-2-3 in the entire sport. You know, Rantanen is probably the best two-way winger in the sport, him or Mitch Marner. I think Sam Reinhart is worthy of consideration for that topic as well. But Rantanen is an elite two-way player who's capable of flirting with 100 points. McKinnon's won some Art Rosses. He's won some Hart trophies. He's great. Makar is probably going to push Nick Lidstrom for all-time Norris trophies when all's said and done. That's how good he is. That defense, beyond Makar, really worries me. Makar in his non-Nathan McKinnon minutes, that worries me. Their goaltending tandem, that worries me immensely. You know, how often do you see a team add a goalie in season? And look, I understand that NHL teams have access to more proprietary information as far as goaltender evaluation than what we have publicly available, because they commission independent statisticians to produce models based on inputs. But the Avalanche currently have a team save percentage of 881 on the season. 881. League average, like we just said, is 894. The Avalanche are conceding 3.17 goals against per game. Their special teams are slightly above average. At least their power play is about 2% above average. Their penalty kill is 2% below league average. They seem to be very high on Mackenzie Blackwood, who put together one good NHL season 3 years ago on a bad Devils team. And I understand the desperation there. He's been very good in the 8 starts he's made. He's got a 938 save. He's only conceding 1.69 goals against. So I could see the Avalanche being a playoff team 100%, even though they've been in and out of wild card division and out of playoff spots entirely. And then real quick on the Canucks, their situation's untenable. They got to get that Miller-Pettersson thing settled one way or another. And whatever that ends up being very well could derail where they've been, because Pettersson is capable of being a 100-point forward with elite defense. JT Miller has been, almost 100-point forward a couple times. And Quinn Hughes playing hurt is helping nobody. Their goaltending situation is complicated, to say the least, when you're dealing with Thatcher Demko coming off of long-term injuries. You have slightly above, you have slightly below average save percentage. Your power play is a little above average. Your kill is a little above average. You have a negative goal differential. You have only two players, over a point per game pace. But Quinn Hughes has been injured and missed time. JT Miller isn't playing particularly well. Only has one power play goal on the year, only 7 even strength goals on the year. And we're talking about somebody who's played 29 games. All of that to say, the Canucks and Avalanche will be playoff teams, and they have the capability of being scary. But right now, as they're currently sitting, I am not worried about either of those teams. We're going to take one more quick break. When we come back, we're going to dedicate the final segment of today's show to the Vegas Golden Knights and why I think they're the one real team the Oilers should be worried about come playoff time. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. This weekend in the NFL, Super Wild Card weekend, Chargers at the Texans. The Chargers are 2.5-point favorites on the road. The Steelers going to Baltimore, where the Ravens are 9.5-point favorites. The Broncos going up to Buffalo, where the Bills are 8.5-point favorites. The Packers heading to Philly, where the Eagles are 4.5-point favorites. The Commanders heading to play the Buccaneers in Tampa, where the Buccaneers are 3-point favorites. And then Monday night, the Vikings heading to LA, where they are 1.5-point road favorites taking on the Rams. Visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. And like I said in the last segment, we will have an episode for you right after the Oilers play the Penguins, hopefully picking up another win in the Eastern Standard Time Zone. Always special when you get Crosby and McDavid across from each other. I'm sure there will be a little more buzz about it this time around, being that they're finally going to get to play on a Team Canada together for Four Nations. I don't know if you guys saw or not, but the teaser for the Matthews and Connor McDavid McDonald's commercial definitely put a smile on my face. And look, hand up, as an American, I was unaware there was a Wayne Gretzky, Matt Sundin, McDonald's horse commercial, because growing up, I was familiar with the Larry Bird, Michael Jordan basketball McDonald's horse commercial, which holds a special place near and dear on my heart in terms of the ridiculousness. But in my estimation, the only team that genuinely scares me, if I am the Oilers, right now at least, is the Vegas Golden Knights. And there's layers to this. Number one, they have won the Stanley Cup. And you could say, well, Nick, you just said the Avalanche aren't particularly concerning, and they won a Stanley Cup not that long ago. You're right. But more of that Vegas team's DNA that won the Stanley Cup is still in place. And look, I know they don't have Jonathan Marchessault anymore. I know they've turned over some of that roster over the last year and a half, 2 years, but Vegas has a great coach. I think Bruce Cassidy has an argument as probably the second best coach in the entire NHL after John Cooper. I think the fact he's gotten Jack Eichel committed to playing Selke caliber defense is nothing short of remarkable. You have proven playoff performers in Mark Stone and Wild Bill Karlsson, in Jack Eichel, in Ivan Barbashev. You have one of the best 1-2-3s on the back end in the entire league in Pietrangelo, Shea Theodore, Noah Hannafin. Aiden Hill is playing like a top 10-ish goalie in the NHL in terms of goals saved above expected. I wrote it down. He's 13th in goals saved above expected. They have a plus 36 goal differential. They have the 6th best power play in the NHL. They score 1 out of every 4 tries. Their penalty kill is 19th. And they have 2 forwards over a point per game in Jack Eichel and Mark Stone. Shea Theodore has 33 points in 39 games while providing above average defense. And I think Vegas presents a unique challenge in that when the Oilers have played them this year, the first 2 times were really tough. You know, the second time they lose 1-0, that game, not a lot of room, not a lot of scoring chances, and it's okay. You're going to have nights like that where a bad bounce is just going to do you in. But the simple matter of the fact of it for me is that the Oilers possess the capability of playing in a way that's going to at least make the Golden Knights work. And that's really the key for me. Can the Oilers play good enough defense to buy their offense enough time to find some goals? Because when you go player by player, I think it's very close. You know, you're going to take McDavid over Eichel. You're probably, what am I talking about? You're definitely taking Draisaitl over Mark Stone. You probably take Bouchard over Shea Theodore. But after that is where you start to make the argument for Vegas, you know, Wild Bill versus Zach Hyman. You're going to probably take William Karlsson. When you get to Nuge versus Ivan Barbashev, based on the counting stats this year, you probably are going to be inclined to take Barbashev. But these two teams have circled each other. They've bumped into each other in the postseason once or twice in the last few years. They've shown, especially in the regular season this year, that it is tough sledding out there. There is not a lot of space. It is very difficult to create offense. And I am curious to see what Vegas does as far as creativity to add at the deadline. We know this is a team that is always resourceful. We know this is a team that has the fortitude to make tough calls, to let franchise players go, to trade star players, to acquire star players. That Thomas Hertl deal last year under the wire, Noah Hannafin last year, very excited for that move. I thought it made a lot of sense for them at the time, and it's fit really well. Hannafin has played noticeably better for them than he did in Calgary, and that Vegas team has the guys. And playoff series are not played player to player, you know, going player by player and trying to determine who's better based on the counting stats isn't always going to be the most fruitful endeavor. But right now, I feel comfortable in saying I think the Oilers are the best team in the West. I think Vegas is the second best team in the West. And then after that, you take your pick between Winnipeg, Minnesota, and Dallas. Any of those three teams are pretty good. Again, we have reservations about all three of them as far as their high-end talent in relation to Edmonton, to Vegas, but there are definitely playoff teams that have the capability of beating the Oilers. And then Colorado and Vancouver, if they get their acts together, I could see them giving the Oilers a very difficult playoff series. But make no mistake about it, the West is significantly better than the East. In the East, the only good team is the Florida Panthers. And look, I know the Devils and the Hurricanes are putting together nice regular seasons. They have good records. They are not the same tier of team as Florida. If Florida locks in, Florida makes a deadline move or two, that team is really scary. We just saw them do it last year, and you can make an argument that with less talent, what they're doing right now is a little more impressive. But that'll do it for today's show. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. We're shooting to get to 2,000 subs by the time the NHL playoff starts in mid-April. We're a smidge over 1,700, so 290 over the next 3.5 months. That's pretty doable. That's my goal. Let's make it happen. Get on board now so that by the time the playoffs come, you're an everyday listener. I will talk to you guys tonight after the game against the Penguins. See you guys then. And until then, let's go Oilers.